Yes, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the RINA office here in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, I'm proud to introduce you Pino Spadafora, who's representing RINA here. And it's the second webinar Shippax is hosting, and this time we have joined forces with RINA. And we did so because there's a lot of challenging times ahead, especially when it comes to decarbonization. So it's high on the agenda of, I think, most ferry operators, and if it's not, it should actually be. So we will discuss this. Since we had the MEPC 75 2 weeks ago, Interferry held their Operators Policy Committee last week, and that's actually why we postponed our webinar by 1 week to wait a little bit, let's say, to get some feedback from what Interferry discussed last week. And when we talk about decarbonization, of course, we also talk about alternative fuels. Will there be a future actually for fossil fuels? We're all trying to find out. We have split this webinar in 2 sessions. One session actually will deal with greenhouse gas emissions, decarbonization, a little bit of feedback from MEPC 75, which was held in London 2 weeks ago, or let's say held digitally. And we will also talk about EEXI, the Energy Efficiency Design Index for existing ships, which is really something that should actually keep ferry operators awake at night, because and then we'll have a second session where we will deal with alternative fuels, and we will have, let's say, different operators representing, perhaps it's wrong to say different opinions, but they will a bit express how they see the way ahead. So we will start with the first session. I'm glad to introduce you Maria Garbarini. She's from RINA. She's in charge of Ro-Ro passenger ship. She's Ro-Ro passenger ship manager at RINA, and she will talk about the challenges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the outcome of the Marine Environment Protection Committee, MEPC 75, 2 weeks ago. Maria, I suggest that the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for your kind introduction. And I'm very proud to open this webinar organized together with Shippax. And who to start with a very brief overview about the main outcome from the last MEPC 75, just concluded a couple of weeks ago, with the topic on greenhouse gas emissions. Let me introduce why some important decisions have been taken during the last committee. As everybody knows, according to the IMO strategy on reduction of the greenhouse gases emission from ships, there will be some ambitious target in terms of a reduction of emission in the next future, with reference to the emission to the 2008. Among them, that will be the reduction of the carbon intensity by the 40% by 2030. And another important key date is the reduction of the greenhouse gases by the 50% by the 2050. Of course, the final main challenges goal is to have the fully decarbonization by the international shipping, maybe within this century. To achieve this important target, of course, we need some technical and operational measures to be implemented, and of course also to be not so dependent by the fossil fuel. Next, please. But which is the current situation of the emissions? According to the last IMO greenhouse gas study, there has been an improvement in terms of carbon intensity in the last years, even if it didn't follow a linear pathway. So we gained a lot, but before 2012. And also about the absolute value of the other greenhouse gases, there is still a growing trend. We still have methane increasing, of course, because LNG is a catching on solution to be used as an alternative fuel, and still also some increase in SOx and NOx in spite of more stringent rules about the use of HFO or the implementation of Tier 2 and Tier 3 compliant machineries. According to the same study, emissions are projected to increase according to a plausible economic and energy scenario to the 19 and to 113% of the 2008 emission by 2050 if no more regulation will be implemented. So this is why it's so important to have a clear framework to address these topics. Next, please. So which will be the pathway to have this regulatory framework in place? During the last MPC 75, some important amendments to MARPOL Annex 6 have been approved in view of their adoption to the next MPC 76 next year in June. Among these amendments, there are some novelties that are including the EEXI, that is a sort of EEDI applied to the existing ships, and this is something we are already quite familiar with. But there is also an operational measure to be implemented that is related to the so-called enhanced SAMP that has to include also a carbon intensity indicator rating. Before next committee, there is still a lot of work to be done, since relevant guidelines to address the index, including how to calculate the attained index, or as well also the reference line for the operational index, are still to be finalized and approved before next committee. In the next week or so, there will be also the entry into force of this amendment. We will have the time for their application and to gain experience of that in order to review in 2025 these regulation in MARPOL Annex 6, in order to have by 2026 the mandatory application of a consolidated carbon intensity indicator framework. Next, please. Which will be the date of entry into force of these amendments? It will be decided on the next MPC 76, and it will be something between 1st November 2022 and 1st January 2033. So that means that about the EEXI, you will have to verify the attained EEXI at the first annual intermediate or renewal survey of the high pollution prevention certificate, or on after this date of entry into force, or at the initial survey of the energy efficiency certificate. And it will be verified by the administration or the recognized organization based on the EEXI technical file. About the enhanced SAMP, for the same entry into force, you have to have an approved SIMP with some mandatory content to be implemented. And among them, there is the methodologies to calculate the required annual operational carbon intensity indicator, to explain which will be the required annual operational carbon intensity indicator for the next 3 years, and an implementation plan to achieve it, and as well also the procedures for the self verification and company audit of this document. Next, please. We have less details about the carbon intensity indicators. We know that it will be something with a metric relevant to the CO2 emission or a transport work expressed in ship's capacity for the covered distance. And after each solar years is to be calculated the attainable annual operational carbon intensity indicator that is to be reported to the administration or RO within March next year, in order to have the verification and approve and the issue of the statement of compliance about the operational carbon intensity rating. Rating, yes, because this is a new scheme with a rating from A to E, and there will be a target value to be achieved that it will be calculated with the required carbon intensity indicator reference line for a specific reduction factor for a given year, and it will be this will be the target value in the middle of category C. So if your ship will be A, B, or C, it will be performing well and you are eligible to have the statement of compliance. But if your ship it will be rated D for 3 consecutive years, or for any years as rated as E, you have to implement a plan of corrective action in SIMP to be verified in order to have this statement of compliance. Next, please. So far, we just discussed about which are the measures to be implemented. Of course, we have also to find out a solution to address this matter. Luckily, there is something on the table, for instance, from the other IMO committee about ship safety, MSC 102, the internet guideline about the use of an alternative fuel that is methyl ethyl alcohol has been approved, and also by the fuel cell relevant guidelines are expected to be finalized in 2021 and approved in 2022. Of course, it is not easy to select the right solution to address to achieve this important target. Next, please. If you don't have an applicable framework to be referred with. And this is why also in RINA we set up a panel of experts that is called Global Fuel Excellence Center that can help you to find the right way to implement your decarbonization pathway and to start really with the very first concept to arrive to the delivery of this solution. Next, please. Anyway, in order to be up to date about the outcome of the MCC 75, also for other matters, and in general, to be updated on any amendment to IMO coded amendments, you can all the time refer to our portal, that is RINA Q, or our money notice and publication on that. So I deem I spent really a lot of words about this matter. Now I deem, Philippe, that we have to go through which will be the consequences and the main challenges from the ferry industry.
Yes, thank you very much, Maria, for this very interesting presentation. In between, before we move on to Poul Woodall of DFDS, some just housekeeping announcements, so to say, is that it's kind of interactive webinar, so it is actually possible to ask questions. All people who are watching, of course, are muted, but you can ask a question. There is a question bar in GoToWebinar, and we have people who are handling these questions, so it is possible to ask questions, and we will be glad actually to try to find an answer to the question you have. Another thing is that we have actually 400, that's what Sam said, who's actually managing the buttons in I think the Brighton office of RINA. We had 468 people registered to attend this webinar, so I think it's that's quite an achievement. So we'll now move on to Poul Woodall of DFDS. He's Senior Advisor Climate and Environment at DFDS. He has been very active, and he will, when it comes to actually, among other things, EEXI, and he will talk about the challenges of EEXI. Poul, the floor is.
Thank you very much, Philippe, and hello to everybody from a very cold Denmark, a little bit north of Copenhagen. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper to some of the things that Maria referred to, the EEXI in particular. And I think it was mentioned that it should keep us awake at night, and indeed it should. If I could just have the next slide, please. The EEXI, as it was mentioned, is a EEDI for existing ships, and it's really based very much on the same formula as the EEDI. So for most people that should be fairly easy. But we have to remember that for our segments, the EEDI formula is non-standard. It was something that the industry got into the system when the EEDI was negotiated, and I guess to some extent it's come back and hit us hard. The reason is that we have this factor in front of the actual EEDI formula that basically nullifies any effect of a reduced power installation on board a ship, and I'll get back to that a little bit more. The EEXI is a license to operate. If you don't have it, you don't sail, and I think that is why most of us maybe don't sleep so well at the moment. We don't know exactly how the EEXI will be calculated. This is what needs to be discussed in the guidelines. But I think it's fairly safe to assume that not all existing ships will pass without something needed to be done. For most other ship types, bulkers, container ships, tankers, the obvious solution is a reduction of the installed power or some kind of reduction to the engine, so it doesn't have the power output that the original installed engines had. That will immediately change the EEXI, and then you can be compliant. You have to sail a little bit slower. That doesn't work for our segment, and therefore it makes it much more complicated to comply with the EEXI if you are above the reference line. The reference line, of course, is the EEDI reference line. For some ships, it's a tier 2, so 20% below the reference line. For our segment, it seems as if 5% will be the agreed factor, and that, of course, is one step in the right direction. But even that adjustment doesn't make it easier to comply with the EEXI because we have this special formula. I can give you one example of one of our ferries. We did the calculation, and it was non-compliant according to the likely EEXI calculation method. And it showed that to comply, i.e. to reduce the EEXI, we should increase the power. We should increase the installed power. And that should be enough to tell everybody that what we're looking at here doesn't work for us. We need to come up with something else. Some of the more logical things that you can do to the kind of ships that we operate don't have any effect on the EEXI. Typically for RoPaxes, shore power is very much done these days. And in fact, if you look at the 2019 MRV database, 16% of the energy used on RoPaxes was in port. So again, shore power, 16% improvement if we did it on the entire fleet. But that's not how EEXI works. So there's definitely something here to pay attention to when we negotiate the guidelines, and we don't have a lot of time to do this. A fundamental thing that is wrong with the EEDI and the EEXI is that it's really deadweight based. And the type of ships that we have don't really carry heavy cargo. And therefore the deadweight is not something we try to optimize on in general. How we make an adjustment to that in the coming weeks, we'll have to see. We're working on this as part of Interferry, trying to come up with a formula that is not only acceptable to our part of the industry, but acceptable to the marine community at large, because of course we as the ferry segment, we have to carry our weight on the essential greenhouse gas reductions that the entire world fleet is needed. So stay tuned to the EEXI discussion. It's important, it's difficult, and as I mentioned, it's a license to operate. Next slide, please, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Talking about poll, we actually have a poll, but written in a different way. We have actually two polls, and the first poll will come on the screen now, so you as an audience can vote here. The questions will come up here. It's related to the topics we discussed. Which, in your opinion, is the most appropriate solution to achieve the required EEXI for an existing ferry? And you can select one of the following questions. It's either limiting the engine power or the shaft power, use alternative fuels such as LNG, methanol, and others. Energy efficiency solutions can be any. I mean, there are quite many there. Or just like scrap your ferry and replace it by another one. Or you can also choose for other. We'll get the results. It's gonna we get the percentages, and we will see perhaps in the next slide, I think, what's the outcome of this poll. So we encourage to click there and to vote and believe what is, or ask your opinion. What should be done to meet EEXI? Please don't hesitate to vote. And at the end of the second session, we will have a similar poll related actually to the second session, of course, which is about alternative fuels. So here we have the results. I think the yes, what we see is that the majority chooses for energy efficiency solutions. It's almost 50% of the people who voted. So then we have alternative fuels, engine power limitation. Yes, I think it's quite obvious. It's what Paul said. I mean, it makes no sense to also reduce your speed if you're a ferry operating between Calais and Dover, for instance, where you can now make 5 round trips, and perhaps we'll have to reduce to 3 round trips. It's rather senseless. And it's actually quite interesting that 13% of the voters believe that we should send our ships to the scrapyard perhaps and replace them with a new ferry. So we'll have some questions, unless there are any questions from the floor. I'm just looking at Pino here on my right-hand side, who's also collecting these questions. Were there any questions, Pino, from the floor regarding the first session? If not, I actually have a question myself. Maria, EEXI, is there such a thing that you can have like an average EEXI which you will implement for your fleet? As far as I understand, EEXI is really ship individual. Could you please elaborate a little bit on this, as this might not be very clear for all our let's say people who are following. You are following this on an everyday basis, but I can imagine that we have people who don't do so, and it's, I think, very interesting to know what the EEXI will mean for them.
Yeah, of course, the simple reply is no. It has to be calculated for each ship. Of course, we are going to evaluate the average of the emission from the shipping sector to achieve the target for the next future. But you have, of course, to look at each ship of the existing ship. And what I would like to take the occasion to really recommend to everybody of you to start with the calculation of the EEXI of your ships. We know, we already explained, and me and Paul, that still relevant guidelines have to be developed, so we don't have really all the method of calculation available so far. We will have in the next month, but it is very important to make an assessment and to understand if your ship will be over or below the mandatory requirement, and also for which it is not so familiar with the EEDI. You have to really well understand which will be the right value to be used for the calculation of the EEXI. Also, it has been very interesting, the result of the pool. I'm happy that everybody, it is quite clear for everyone that the engine power limitation or the shaft power limitation so far is not a solution for the ferry sector. It doesn't work. But as well, also the result about the replacement of the ferry is not a good point. We don't have the time, and it would be a shame to apply this solution. I deem that we really have to perform an assessment about which is the situation for the ferry industry and in the sea, which will be the consequences for it.
Okay, thank you, Mary. In the meantime, well, we got some questions in here, and one is actually related to energy efficiency solutions. There was one question. I think Dario, he was briefly joining us, and he left again because they have implemented that, and they have now the first ship operating on that. There was a question: will retrofitting an air lubrication system help improve your EEXI rating on your existing vessels? So that's clearly an example of energy efficiency solution. Unfortunately, Dario is not there. I don't know if there's anybody else, and then please raise your hand. I think Per could perhaps, he's raising your hand. I hope you're raising your hand, Per. Would that be any of the many solutions, perhaps? And I see Dario is there, but it's only his apartment.
Well, perhaps I can just come in here. One of the big uncertainties that we still have is to calculate the reference speed for the ships. And we don't know exactly how we do that for existing ships, because we may not have a sea trial that involves the relevant data, if we even have a sea trial data set. One of the options for getting the reference speed is, of course, doing a new sea trial. And if you do the new sea trial with a lubrication system, well, then you get a value that takes that into effect when you calculate the EEXI. But whether we get that option for determining the reference speed, we don't know yet. The reference speed is really a key issue to getting this right.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps you wanted to add something there?
Yes, thank you, Philip. Hopefully, we could have the original sea trial as the base, and then you could sort of prove that the energy the efficiency device saves 1 to 3%, and then reduce or actually increase the speed correspondingly.
Thank you, Per. It would be nice actually to hear Dario, but apparently he has disappeared again. He had another meeting in the meantime, but he promised to be there later on. I have actually another question for Maria. Do we already know what it takes to move up in the C2 ranking, for example, from C to C or D to C?
As I explained, the target value will be in the middle of C rating, so that will be the baseline. And of course, we have some room between the category. And as I explained, in case you are rated as D, you have to understand if you are going to be rated as D for 3 years, and in case you have to do something and to implement something yourself. And as explained, also if you are in A is the same. So there will be some rooms between the category, and of course also in this case we have to wait for the last guidelines to be sure which will be the final decision about that.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Time is flying, and we are almost moving to the second session, but I think this must be a supplier's question for Paul, I think. DFDS, why not waste heat recovery? Approximately 500 kilowatt net power from exhaust gas heat for RO vessels. That's perhaps a supplier of heat recovery devices who's asking this question.
Well, it's all down to the formula on what's included and what's not included on the formula. And this is a one-time picture. You get your EEXI certificate, and that is basically valid for the lifetime of the ship, unless you do a major conversion. In which case you need to get a new certificate. So it's the EDI and the EEXI formulas are extremely complicated on power take in, power take out, and all sorts of hotel loads when we come to RoPaxes. The best thing one can do is, as Marie also mentioned, talk to your recognized organization and look through your own fleet and see where you are. And if you have ships that are on the borderline or maybe above the borderline on what we think it will be, you have to start thinking about what measures you can do. In this connection, of course, those who are members of Interferry, they have some good contacts there that you can all use. And those who are not members of Interferry, maybe you should be. But we are looking at this in great detail. And trying to calculate the various possible solutions for where we're going to end up, because we don't really have a lot of time here.
Thank you, Paul, and it's very interesting indeed. It's no time to waste, absolutely. Just one question that springs to my mind, and perhaps it's also good to know, because we have already ships meeting EEDI, and they are actually, to a certain extent, existing ships. So these are existing ships that already meet EEDI. For that kind of ships, do they also have to meet EEXI? I don't know who could answer that. Perhaps Maria?
No.
No? Paul, you
no. I mean, these are for non-EEDI ships.
Okay. So that means when you have EEDI, you don't have to meet EEXI anymore.
Yeah.
Because EEXI has been decided after EEDI. Okay, good. Perhaps the last one before we move on to the next session. There was one question about reducing the overall vessel weight by the use of aluminium. So the main power size can be reduced. Perhaps it's an Incat or Ostel who's following the session, I don't know. But is there anybody of you? I think Paul, you since you were also at the Interferry OPC meeting last week, perhaps comment on that.
That's a couple of things one has to remember here. First of all, there's a threshold of 5,000 GT. But there's also a threshold called international shipping. So in reality, if you build or have a ship that only trades domestically, you're not necessarily covered by these rules, unless, of course, your flag state has decided that you need to be covered by it anyhow. Having said that, deadweight is an important factor in the EEXI calculation, and if you have build a light ship, your deadweight is likely going to be different. So it's something that that you need to think about. But retrofitting with lightweight materials, I'm not sure that's a solution for the existing ships. But then I'm not a naval architect, so.
Thank you, Paul. Because actually, when I heard that the Spino saying something, just good because my eyes are not really the best, to be honest. We will see a lot of rescue versus domestic. What do you mean here? Well, what actually I wanted to ask is that the vast majority actually of the fleet, of the ferry fleet, is domestic, and we can argue about that. I can imagine that in Europe here, flag states will probably say, since you have, although you're a domestic ship, many are already SOLAS compliant anyway. Many of these domestic ships, but I can imagine that countries like Indonesia, I'm not saying that they won't care, but there it perhaps won't be implemented. So actually, given the vast majority of the ferries being domestic, what are we actually talking about? And if you look on the global fleet of ships, the number of international ferries is rather limited, isn't it? So it's just, I'm just wondering, I mean, it's like a drop of water in the ocean, I mean, we're talking about, or?
Probably the majority of the smaller ships are domestic only, and from the data set we have seen, the key problem area are indeed the smaller ships when it comes to complying with the likely calculation of an EEXI. But I've also heard that a number of flag states are going to say that if this is the international standard, it will also be the national standard. So. Be interesting to see.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add, Maria, before we move on, or you, Paul, before we move on to the next session, because it's time is flying and we have 3 more speakers coming up, whom we also have to give a forum, so to say. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add. If not, I'm happy.
I really deem that we talk about very interesting topics also coming from our audience. I'm really happy about that, and I deem we can go on with other panelists.
Perfect. Then we move on to the next session. Sorry, Paul. Yes.
The only thing I would add was to repeat: check your ships, talk to your recognized organization. If you are in doubt, start thinking about it now.
Yes. It's actually, it's already 12:05, I would say, or? Yeah. So we move on to the next session, and we have Per. We are glad to have Per Wimby here from Stena Teknik at the table. And Stena Teknik, Per, I would say you are the technical brains of the whole Stena sphere, assisting all your sister companies like Stena Roro. And I remember I was traveling with Per Westling in China in late 2018 when we were visiting, among other things, the Avik Waihai, the then Avik Waihai shipyard. And he said, when it comes to Stena, the E-flexes you have still under construction in China will be the last fossil fuel ferries. So perhaps you can shine a light on what is next in line for Stena. Please go ahead, Per.
Thank you, Philippe. That was very kind of you, a kind introduction. And thanks to RINA and also Shippax for inviting Stena to this webinar. Yeah, alternative fuels is high on Stena's agenda. We have converted 4-stroke engines into methanol dual fuel engines for future use of biomethanol. We are also tested cooking oil, and from good fuel, and we have also tested FAME from Exxon. And I will also stress that we have a number of projects with oil majors to find a best alternative fuel. In short, I could say that the best for us is to have a fuel which is fossil free and can be used in the existing engines that we have. But until we have that solution, we are exploring other ways, and that is electricity. So today I will talk about Stena electromobility. The picture you see in front of you right now is the Stena E-Flexer, which we have 9 of these ships being ordered at the CMI shipyard in Weihai. So please, next slide. As Maria stressed, in 2018, IMO came up with this strategy for climate change. And that is, of course, one of the drivers for alternative fuel for us. But the other driver, I would say, is that we are waiting for, as I said, a better fuel, better efficiency at a lower cost, but also better for the environment. I mean, we didn't stop using coal because there was a lack of coal. We stopped using coal because a better fuel came up, which was oil. You can take the next slide, please. So, electromobility, electric power. Of course, we have to know where the origin from electricity comes, how it is produced. That's very important. And this is a print from a site where you can see how green the electricity is. And of course, it varies a lot in Europe. And I mean, the conditions for shore power is very different if you're comparing Sweden, Norway, France, Iceland with Germany, Poland, etc. But I think and I believe that it's up to the countries to fix this. And I just yesterday heard that Poland, which is very, very dark here in this picture, they have decided to close their coal plants by 2049, which is a long time from now. But anyhow, I think it's up to the countries to fix this. But as you can see on the map, that Scandinavia is a good place to have shore connections. So if you take next slide, please. This is sort of our timeline at Stena for electromobility. We started very early. We started in 1989 with shore power. It's not the correct picture of the shore power at that time, but at that time it was low voltage. We had 9 cables connecting the ship, and it was a little bit complicated, but we were pioneers and we tried it out here in Gothenburg. 2005, we changed the system to high voltage system. So now it is 10.5 kilovolts that we have. And today we have 14 ships that are connected while they are in port. 2010, we did a funny testing. We took the central heating from Gothenburg and actually supplied heat to the ship as well. 2014, we introduced the all electric HH ferries between Helsingborg and Helsingør. We were part owners of that route at that time. Now it's been sold, so we did not finalize the project. 2018, we introduced the ESS energy storage system on board Stena Utlandica, which is trading between Gothenburg and Fredrikshavn. It's a 1 megawatt-hour battery storage that is used for the big consumers on board, such as the bow thrusters, etc. And it's also a big sort of UPS for the whole ship. On board, they call it the blackout preventer. And it also it's helping the auxiliary engines to work in a better way. So it's sort of a peak shaver for the auxiliaries. What we're doing right now is that we are together with other companies like DNV, Stena Recycling, the Port of Gothenburg, Port of Kiel, and we're doing this EEXI study for having a battery storage on the quay side, enabling us to quick sort of transfer energy to the ship without sort of pushing the grid too much. The last two bullet points in this is that we are looking at a hybrid solution. Hybrid in such a way that we will have propulsion using battery electric. The years are indicative, but we're aiming for in 2030 to have 100% battery electric ship between Gothenburg and Frederikshavn, or I would say on the route 50 nautical miles. And if you take next slide, I can show you how it looks like. So this is a ship for the future, fully electric driven RoPax for Stena Line, with some numbers of passengers and lane meters, as you can see. We are talking about 50 nautical miles on batteries. If we go higher up, we probably need a mix out of batteries and fuel cells driven on hydrogen. But of course, we can't do this alone. It requires a lot of collaboration. There was a question about weight, etc. This ship should be 50% lighter. It should be 50% more efficient in regards to resistance. So there are a lot of research that is needed to be done. Also, we have to look on the battery side, the battery development. And if fuel cells, if we will use that, we need some more research on that. So that will end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Per. So we learned that this Stena Electric will be in service in more or less 10 years from now, and then Poland will still burn coal for another 19 years. That's what I've retained here. So let's move on to the next speaker, who's Tarvi-Carlos Tuulik, he's the CEO of ship management at Tallink Grupp. As we all know, Tallink, they have an LNG-powered RoPax ferry sailing between Helsinki and Tallinn, or Tallinn and Helsinki, I should say. For many years, LNG was regarded as the fuel of the future, and it was also actually the perfect fuel, let's say, when we're talking about 0.1% sulfur cap. We all, I think, agree that it is transition fuel, and we can talk about batteries and we can talk about hydrogen, but especially for several fuels, it's still a chicken and egg thing. For LNG, this is no longer the case. So I will let Tarvi-Carlos talk about their LNG project they have implemented on Megastar and the next ship they have coming, MyStar. Please go ahead, Tarvi-Carlos.
Thank you, Philippe, for the introduction. And you're absolutely right that LNG is a great transitional fuel. And I will share a little bit our company experience with LNG fueled ships. So please be so kind and take the next slide. LNG as a fuel looks promising, at least for the new builds. There is basically no sulfur at all, and it will reduce considerably particulate matter and NOx within exhaust gases, which is very important when you are having a ferry connection between two big cities. And the use of LNG as ship's fuel is reducing CO2 emissions as well. But we all have heard this so many times before. In fact, we can confirm on our own experience that it's true. Tallink Grupp received its first LNG fuel RoPax ship back in early 2017. The ship is named Megastar, and she sails between city centers of Helsinki and Tallinn. So on the same route with the same schedule, Megastar emitted in its first year of operation, 2017, it was 39% less of CO2 than the ship she replaced on this route. Our experience also indicates that in 5-year perspective, LNG fuel ships OPEX versus conventional fuel ships OPEX could be even 50% lower. For example, the first order of the engine oil change was made after almost 2 years in operation. This reflects on the fact that there is no soot, no abrasive particles in the fuel, so it's clean fuel. And based on this, Tallink Grupp has ordered the next LNG-fueled ships to be operational by 2022. Next slide, please. So if we compare, for example, two ships, Star versus Megastar, operating in the same route with the same profile, same conditions, and the Star uses conventional fuel, in our case means ultra-low sulfur fuel oil, which contains sulfur less than 0.1%. The difference in absolute CO2 annual figures varies between 30%. And during the life cycle of the ships, 30 years, if we consider, we have calculated that there will be 700,000 tons less of CO2 emitted compared to the conventional ships. So next slide, please. And this is amazing difference in absolute SOx annual figures is more than 90%, of course. So there are cleaner air in the city centers, and totally 13,000 tons less CO2 during the life cycle of the ships. Next slide, please. So I'm using here this forecast from the DNV GL to the 2050, and probability is that the most viable carbon-free alternative energy source for the ships for the future will be dual fuel, ammonia internal combustion engines and fuel systems, dual fuel engines. That is due to the expected price and lowest investment cost for storage capabilities on board. As we know, the energy density of the fuel is quite important. Today, the engines and fuel system which use ammonia are unfortunately far from ready for use, but it could allow us to use existing engines on board. And here I think the ball is on the engine manufacturer's side to come up with new innovations. On 2050, the most probable carbon-free fuel would be ammonia, although bio-LNG, e-LNG, MGO, methanol, but they maintain their limited but stable share of the new builds, we believe. This allows to assume that the latter are more than just bridging fuels for certain types of the vessels. So even the LNG engines, they are dual fuel engines, so you can combine with the different kinds of synthetical fuels, which will be in the future maybe carbon neutral. So what will be our next steps? What we are taking already now? So please, the next slide. So use of LNG as fuel for the ships is growing in our area, we see. So this is next 5-10 years. That said, Tallink has contributed to this with our new build Megastar, and together with our partner Eesti Gas are already planning the next steps. So with our next new building with LNG MyStar has 28% bigger LNG tanks, which together with LNG bunker ship will considerably reduce the number of the bunkerings. This is also, I see the problem with new alternative fuels, the energy density, that the ships need to be more frequently bunkered actually. And that is easy to do with these fixed line ships, but on the deep sea roads, we need more, and like maybe mixed combination with energy efficiency and better hydrodynamics. So that's shortly was my presentation. Thank you, and next slide.
Thank you, Tarvi-Carlos. Hopefully we'll have some time left for questions afterwards. In the meantime, Dario Bocchetti from Grimaldi Group joined us. I have the impression that you're in the Naples office. Dario, welcome here. Dario is the head of energy saving and innovation at the Grimaldi Group. He will talk about the hybridization, I should say, of their ships. I mean, they have 2 ships with batteries installed, the cruise class ships flying between Barcelona and Civitavecchia, in order to produce zero emissions when in port. And it's something you've also implemented on your new GG5G Valencia, which was introduced as recently as 10 days ago, if I'm not wrong, which actually also had this Super Technologies bubble carpet or bubble system. We had a question that in the earlier session, so perhaps you could briefly talk about that as well. So please talk about the Grimaldi strategy when it comes to, let's say, alternative fuels. I think you're muted. I think you're muted, Dario. We can't hear you. We can't hear it, Dario. Can you hear us? You can hear us, but we don't hear you. Perhaps Sam can interfere, I don't know. But unfortunately, we don't hear you. Perhaps we should wait a few more seconds. It's strange. Yeah. Dario, are you there? We can't hear you. In the meantime, perhaps we can already, while trying to solve the problem, Dario.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Okay, good. Thank you, Dario.
Okay. So this is not the best introduction for decarbonization or innovation. Sorry about that. It is said that at least in Italy, we have a way of saying that we have a good, if you act well, maybe you do well when it is about work, but not so well when it is about personal stuff. So I am, in this sense, I hope that at least for the company and for the shipping, we do well. So what I will present very shortly, now I have only 3 minutes left, I guess. So I will go very shortly. Please, next slide. What we want to present.
No longer, your camera is switched off.
Can you change the next slide, please? Okay, thank you very much. It is a lot has been said already during this webinar. So, you know, our company, we have a lot of projects towards decarbonization. There is a lot of talking. About the new rules, eventually something never heard before, that the ships could be forced to lose the license after 2023 if they are not really efficient, or if they don't have a program for reducing the emissions. So many things are changing in this respect. But what we present is what we have decided as our strategy towards the decarbonization that is nowadays possible with the electricity. Electricity is not for all. We have heard that there are many different solutions among alternative fuels, if electricity can be considered among the alternative fuels. But even with the largest installation of batteries, we have a 5.5 megawatt-hour per ship. Still, you can just do a few hours for a cruise ferry import, or eventually 8 hours for a ro-ro vessel. You cannot yet sail, you cannot reach rather than few miles. You can work for the fjords, but it's still not possible, of course, to make long distance or deep sea voyages. This is why we have decided to approach this in combination with another fact that we operate mainly Mediterranean, and the cold ironing facilities are not yet available. For this reason, our strategy has been to continue to use the fossil fuel on the main engine, combined with exhaust gas cleaning system, but to start from the place where pollution is more significant to tackle the emissions. And this is the ports. In Mediterranean, but I guess everywhere, but for our experience where we live, the ports, especially for RoPax vessel, but also for this ro-ro vessel, are very close to the town. And basically you emit in the houses of the people. And this is why we have decided to start from the port. So the waiting for cold ironing, we do our zero emission import with the large batteries that are charged at sea through shaft generator efficient way, with the reduced specific fuel oil consumption of the large main engine, with the shaft generator that you would have basically anyway. So with a very minor effect on the speed of the ship, basically you charge the battery and we discharge it ashore. And we have a program of 16 vessels, 81 megawatt-hour total capacity installed on 16 vessels, which is close, I think, to the largest battery power factory in Australia or something like that. The next slide, please. We have this ship has been just delivered. This is the first ro-ro of a class of 12 large ro-ro vessel. But what the numbers that I show you are for 2 ships that already went through a lengthening program almost 2 years ago. And since June 2019, we have already consumed in port the energy accumulated in the batteries for 958,000 kilowatt-hour for one ship and 934,000 kilowatt-hour for the other ship, with the reduction of emission in port that you can see in the table below. This is equivalent to having supplied electricity to 630 houses completely for 1 year on our batteries. I stop here because the time is not a lot, but of course we remain available for any question and discussion. Thank you.
Okay, grazie mille, Dario. We will go to the next poll, and we have only even less than 5 minutes left. So please feel free to fill out which, in your opinion, is the most appropriate decarbonization option for the ferry industry. There's several possibilities: batteries, biofuels, ammonia, hydrogen, wind assisted propulsion. It could perhaps be a combination of any of these. So please fill out, and we will get the results in a second. In the meantime, actually, I already have a question for Tarvi-Carlos, because there were actually 2 questions related to that, to your the Megastar. It was about the methane of your 4-stroke medium speed engines. This is not incorporated in your figures, one of the watchers is saying. Methane slip is 23 times worse than greenhouse gas emissions than CO2. And another one similar is emissions are being measured, and Star versus Megastar looks impressive. Is methane slip being measured? So, Carlos, when we're finished this poll here, it would be good to hear what about the methane slip on the Megastar.
Okay.
Yes. Or perhaps you could already answer why we're waiting for the outcome of this poll.
Okay, I can give a short comment about this. So the methane slip currently is not measured. So it's calculated according to the engine maker's figures, actually. And for example, with the MyStar, with engine maker, we are also considering the new innovation, how to reduce the metal slip from the combustible engines. So true, this is a problem, the metal slip for the LNG dual fuel vessels.
Yeah, correct. So we've got the result here from the poll, which is a little bit mixed. So more than 1/3 of the people who are following believe that hydrogen is the way forward when it comes to decarbonization, followed by batteries, and then biofuels, and then ammonia, and then wind-assisted propulsion. And I think we've seen initiatives in all these fields so far. So perhaps just to get back to batteries, there was also one question actually about the battery capacity for PER on your Stena Electra. What will the battery capacity be in megawatt hours? Because did I understand well that it will be a combination of hydrogen and batteries? Will you, for instance, make the outward leg on batteries and then the return leg on hydrogen, or did I misunderstand or get something wrong?
Thank you, Philippe. It depends on the range, I would say. If we are below like 50 nautical miles, I believe that we can run on batteries only. And then we are talking the size of the battery, or the battery installed, I would say, is roughly 60 megawatt hour in that region. But bear in mind that you cannot use the full capacity. If you want to have a long life for the batteries, you can only use 50–60% of the installed capacity.
And you have some experience with the batteries on Stena Atlantica, where you're using it for maneuvering. I think they are powering the bow trusses, if I'm not wrong. And I remember an interview with Nicholas Mortensen, the CEO of Stena Line, who told me that, probably was referring to Stena Teknik, that there were some teething problems. I mean, it was like underestimated. He was referring to Tesla cars. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it didn't run as smoothly as first expected. Or am I getting things wrong here?
I think you have things wrong, Philippe. No, it actually it runs very well. It's been now 2.5 years, and we are extremely pleased with the performance. Yes.
Okay.
But it's the battery management is an important role. We are learning about how you use your batteries. That's very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Dario? I mean, you have now experienced 1.5 years with batteries used for other purposes. I mean, you're using it instead of your auxiliaries when in port. But how has it been working for Roma and Barcelona?
So you hear me, right?
Yes, Dario.
Okay. So the experience overall is satisfactory. Of course, this is something new. You know that the battery also on your car have the issue of the autonomy, and if you think to a ship, this is a continuous battle to reduce the electric load demand, because we try to reduce the request from the passenger for air condition during summer, the chief engineer for the ventilation. The issue is more related to the high loads rather than the functionality of the battery themselves. Of course, you can have a few racks or few batteries that need maintenance replacement. Over 1,000 batteries we have installed for such 5.5 megawatt hour. Overall, the number of failure and things is still totally under control. But we are in the beginning, and as you said, we do not many cycles, not many charge and discharge. We will be able to comment more after 5 years. After the 2 years, they are working well. They are working as designed.
Okay, thank you, Dario. I think we have to stop. I have actually one more question before we really close this webinar. I don't know, Paul, whether or not you could comment on that, but last week DFDS surprised the world with quite a few big news, one of which was the project for a hydrogen-powered ferry. Could you briefly, in just a couple of words, explain this project? Because it's the first of a kind.
It's more than the first of a kind. It's an extremely ambitious project, moving beyond the existing borders of what has been done. It is extremely challenging, and I think for the people directly involved with the project, a lot of credit has to go to them for this innovative thinking. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to be extremely costly. But hopefully we gain some experience, and I hope very much the experience we gain we can share with the rest of the community. That's really how we work in the ferry industry when it comes to decarbonization. 2027 is the target year. If I'm still around, I'll look forward to seeing what it looks like.
I think we can conclude actually that we have much evidence here that ferry operators are actually going the extra mile to meet, let's say, the decarbonization targets. And let's meet again perhaps in next time, because this won't be off the table for the next couple of years. So I would like to thank our speakers, Maria, Paul, Per, Tarvi-Carlos, and Dario for joining us in this webinar, which Shippax jointly presented with RINA. And well, I wish you, let's say, good times. Stay safe, and perhaps it's early, but also already a Merry Christmas. I mean, in many countries, they're already more or less celebrating Christmas because of COVID. So I would like to thank you all, and I look forward to meeting you another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you.
Thank you.